Hi, and welcome to the Becoming Trauma-Informed podcast, where we help you understand how your past painful experiences are affecting your current reality and how you can shift those so you can create your desired future. I'm Dr. Lee, and both myself and our team at the Institute for Trauma and Psychological Safety are excited to support you on your journey. We talk about all the things on this podcast. No topic gets left uncovered. So, extending a content warning to you before we get started. If you notice yourself getting activated while listening, invitation to take care of yourself and to pause, skip ahead a bit, or just check out another episode. Let's dive in. Hey y'all, Dr. Lee here. Welcome to this week's episode on boundaries. This is actually a recording of a Facebook Live I did in our free Facebook group, Becoming Trauma Informed, Creating Safer, Shame-Free Spaces. So if you'd like to join that group, you can head to the show notes and follow the link there. And if not, totally cool, because you get to hear the live here. I hope you enjoy. Hello. I'm so excited to talk about boundaries today. I just scarfed my lunch and had the spiciest meal in a long time. So my tongue is literally on fire. I wanted to circle back to a conversation on boundaries because we have a lot of new people in the group. And this is like one of the most eye-opening, perspective shifting, helpful things that I learned along my journey to becoming more trauma informed and to really revolutionizing the way that I showed up in connection with other humans, the way that I decided what was allowed for myself, and in realizing my own desires. And honestly, it's a conversation that I think we should have way earlier in life. Like, this is something that should be required education. A lot of the things that we talk about, I think, should be required education for us when we're younger. And the reason is that boundaries literally affect every single relationship that you have, including the one that you have with yourself. And so today I want to talk about what boundaries are. I'm going to give you one of my favorite analogies that I've developed over the years that I think is just like really, really helpful. And so we're going to talk about what they are. We're going to talk about how we set them and hold them. We're going to talk about how trauma and past painful experiences can affect how we set them and how we approach boundaries and how they can get a little bit either too rigid or too stretchy, too flexible. And hopefully at the end of this will really have you rethinking how you're showing up in some of your relationships and also give you the tools that you need in order to be able to really go out and be in connection with people in a way that feels really good for you. Also, just for the spirit of if this happens, we're literally having a new oven stove installed right now, because of course that's when they decided to arrive. So the dog's barking and the guy's bringing it in the house. So just evidence of real life for you right here. This is how life goes, right? We make it work. So if you're hearing my poor guy in the background, he's fine. He just wants to say hi to the delivery man. What are boundaries? The way that we explain this at the Institute is we think of each of us having our own plot of land. So each of us has our own plot of land when we're born. And that plot of land is our physical body, our nervous system, our mental body. Like, all of these things are housed on that plot of land. And our boundaries around that are set in a way that they demarcate, they define the transition between autonomy and connection. Okay. Boundaries define, they are the meeting place of autonomy and connection. So where I am on my own and where I am in connection with another human being. So when we're born into our plot of land, we are connected. Our plots of land are surrounded by other plots of land, just based off of who our family is, who the people are who are our immediate caretakers. And they are the ones that we first form boundaries with. They're the first plots of land that get plopped down beside ours, or we get plopped down beside theirs more accurately. And so this is the first place that we learn to start demarcating our boundaries, where we start to learn the difference between autonomy and connection. Because remember, when we're humans and you're born onto the planet, you've been connected to mom. There's been or to the parent who birthed you. There's been no disconnection between the two of you until the moment that umbilical cord is separated. The moment that umbilical cord is cut, you have boundaries. Your plot of land and the person who birthed you's plot of land are now separate. That's a little bit of a startling thing, because up until this point, there have been no boundaries, right? You're literally inside of somebody else. So the first couple of years are just learning, okay, literal physical boundaries. When I touch this is separate from me, right? When I do something, this other person can have feelings that are in response to my actions. And so this can be physical and it can be emotional as well. These demarcations between autonomy and connection are both actual physical connections where we are separate versus we are touching. You are in my personal space, right? Because boundary also extends a little bit into our personal space. If you ever had somebody that stands too close to you, they're not touching you. Or have you ever had a sibling where they're like holding their finger this far from your face and they're like, I'm not touching you. You're like, right? Like they're too close. They're in your physical space. They're in your personal space. They are on your plot of land. It feels like they're on your plot of land, right? So when we think about that piece, like it can be physical or it can be more emotional, psychological, where the connection is we are vibing about something we're talking about. I'm 3 years old. I love dinosaurs. Mom, do you love dinosaurs? You love dinosaurs too? Oh my gosh, I love dinosaurs so much. Let me tell you all about dinosaurs. And mom's like, yes, tell me all about dinosaurs. Versus, Mom, I love dinosaurs so much. Do you love dinosaurs? And your mom's like, dinosaurs are dumb, right? Connection versus autonomy. So learning that other people can have opinions and can see the world differently than we do is part of the creation of boundaries. Understanding that we're allowed to see the world differently than other people is part of boundaries. So we have our plot of land, and our plot of land is our body and the personal space around it, right? And then we have the house. And the house is our mind. The house that lives on that plot of land is our mind. It's our nervous system. And that inside that house, or around that house, there is a security system. There's a security system for the entire plot of land that basically says when it is safe for somebody to connect with us versus when it is not. And that security system, or that guard dog, I like to think of it as a guard dog. There's a guard dog that like roams the plot of land and is like, yes, you may come on, you may connect, or no, you may not. And that guard dog, that security system that guards the plot of land and guards the house, guards our mental self, is fundamentally impacted by your lived experiences. That guard dog deems what is safe, when it is safe for connection, versus when it is unsafe for connection, when it desires autonomy, based off of what it's learned about autonomy and connection. So thinking about this, some of us have guard dogs that are very, very, very touchy. Some of us have guard dogs that go off at every single little thing. Some of us have guard dogs that are hyper vigilant, right? They don't sleep, they don't eat. They just like roam looking for danger. A lot of us who've experienced trauma have guard dogs on this plot of land that are continuously ready for threat. They're expecting threat. They're expecting danger. They're expecting someone who is going to try to come in and connect with us in a way that doesn't feel good, that threatens our plot of land, that threatens our house. And so they bark and they snarl at anyone who comes close. And some of us have guard dogs that are just hiding in the house. We have guard dogs that are like, anyone ever had one of those dogs that looks really scary? And then you get even close and they're like wagging their tails and rolling over on their backs and like, oh my gosh, you can come in, right? They're either really scared or they're like, I'm not threatened by anything. Ideally, we have a guard dog that accurately assesses for physical and psychological threat, actively assesses for threat to the plot of land, our physical body, and to our house, our mental, psychological, emotional health selves. So ideally, we have guard dogs that go, okay, I can accurately assess when something is actually dangerous versus when something is just kind of maybe looks dangerous and isn't really. Now, I have yet to meet a human whose guard dog is 100% accurate at determining when something is actually threatening versus just feels threatening. And again, this is where trauma comes into play. This is where past painful experiences come into play. And this is where complex trauma really comes into play. Because we talked about as a child, that separation from the parent who birthed you. That's when boundaries start to get formed. If we have lots of improper or unhealthy boundary setting, if we have unhealthy times of autonomy and unhealthy times of connection, meaning that when we reach out for love, safety, and belonging, we're not met with love, safety, or belonging. Or maybe when we want physical space or we want alone time or we need to separate ourselves in order to be psychologically healthy, the other person that we're in connection with doesn't allow that and they keep trying to connect. And we'll talk about what types of boundaries those are in a second. But if we have that happening on a frequent basis when we are young, when we are just learning to establish boundaries, then our guard dog is not going to learn how to guard against actual threat. Our guard dog is going to learn how to guard against a lot of potential threat. And that's because if we have a lot of experiences where when we want autonomy, it's not honored, and when we want connection, it's not honored, our guard dog gets confused and he can't tell, or it can't tell, who's safe and who's not. And so he or it starts scanning all the time, looking for danger. It becomes hypervigilant. Now, depending on if we have an empowered guard dog versus a disempowered guard dog, that affects how we're going to show up towards other people. And our guard dog can feel empowered in some circumstances and disempowered in other circumstances. So in some circumstances, it can gnash its teeth and snarl and bark and growl. And in other circumstances, it can cower and roll over and show you its belly and play dead. And so we've talked in previous lives in this group and also on previous podcast episodes, because this is going up as a podcast. We've talked about the trauma responses of fight and flight and fawn and freeze. And if you haven't listened to those, I highly recommend doing that. And this is where trauma responses come in. If our guard dog has had a lot of experience with fight working against specific people who come in and try to attempt connection when it doesn't feel good, or who try to remove connection when it doesn't feel good, our guard dog will fight. He will bark. He will snarl. He will snap at you. If our guard dog is used to fleeing, he'll run away. If our guard dog is used to using fawn, that's where he might come up and kiss you and love on you. Please be my friend. I'm not threatening. Hang out with me. And if our guard dog has tried those things in the past towards threatening situations and those haven't worked, then our guard dog might not guard at all. He might be hypervigilant. He might be looking for threat all the time. And anytime anyone attempts to come onto our plot of land, or anytime anyone invites us over onto their plot of land, he might be like, nope, sorry, that's not a thing. I'm going to just freeze. and not bark and not snarl. I'm just going to freeze or fall over and play dead. That's our fright, our freeze response. And when I say empowered and disempowered, a lot of times people put a connotation on that as if the empowered response is better, quote unquote, better than the disempowered response. It's not. The empowered response is not better than the disempowered response. As humans, we generally, our nervous system will try the empowered responses first. It will try to fight, flee, or fawn first, because that is the order in which we go: fight, flee, fawn. If those don't work, that's where we go into the disempowered response. So a lot of people are like, oh, I always have disempowered responses. That means that I'm like worse off than the people who have empowered ones. No, it just means that you had a lot of practice when you were younger trying the empowered responses, and they either didn't feel safe or they didn't work. So your learned habits are now disempowered because you had a lot of situations in which you were overpowered. And that's nothing about you. That says everything about your experiences, not anything about you as a human. So this isn't a place to like make yourself wrong. Disempowered responses are freeze responses. They're where we go, I'm in danger. And as a guard dog, I'm in danger, but I can't do anything about this. So I am just going to roll over and play dead. So an example of a disempowered response from a human perspective, right? Somebody reaches out and says, hey, oh my goodness, you're offering this really cool offer. I would love to hire you. And you freeze and you ghost them because you're like, I might fail, or I might mess up, or I might have this, or I might have that. And other times where people have tried to hire me, I wasn't great at it and I don't trust myself. And so I'm just going to get literally stuck and not answer this person back, even though they want to hire me. Or another example of freeze literally is physically getting stuck. If you've ever been so scared by something and you're like, I should run, or I should try to get out of the way, and I can't. This thing is coming onto my plot of land to potentially hurt me. They are trying to connect with me in a hurtful, harmful way, and I can't move. So that's an example of a disempowered response. It's not that you are choosing it. It is that your nervous system has seen, I can't do anything to stop this. Your guard dog doesn't feel empowered to protect the plot of land. He doesn't feel like he's going to be successful. So he plays dead. Okay. So when we think about boundaries and this meaning of autonomy and connection, right? We can have a violation of boundaries, meaning someone comes onto your plot of land when you haven't invited them. Someone tries to connect with you when you haven't extended an invitation. And we can have a neglect of boundaries. This is where I say, hey, can you please come over and connect with me? And they don't. Hey, will you come over on my plot of land? I could really use your help. Nope. Sorry. I'm going to stay over here. So we can have boundary intrusions and we can have neglect. Another way of putting terms on this is thinking about boundaries as porous or rigid. Let's set the guard dog example over to the side for a second. And this will help if that's not resonating with you. You're like, I don't have a guard dog. What some people do, let's say that they don't like guard dogs. That doesn't feel like a good thing. What some people do, ideally, what we would do in order to demarcate and identify our plot of land is to build a fence, a white picket fence with a nice little gate in the middle that's got a lock on it, but like it clearly demarcates your plot of land from other people's plot of land. Yes? So if we are setting up healthy boundaries, if we are setting up boundaries that feel aligned for us, what that means is that we leave our fence and go over onto other people's plot of land when it feels good for us. And we allow other people to come in onto our plot of land when it feels good for us as well. The only time that we connect with other people, either by us going onto their plot of land or them coming onto ours, is when it feels mutually beneficial. We both have autonomy when we want to have autonomy, and we both have connection when we want to have connection. The way in which we connect feels good for both of us. Those are healthy boundaries. The way in which I connect with this person feels good for me, and the way in which I disconnect and have autonomy from this person feels good for me. We both have white picket fences. We both invite each other over. There's consent involved. I really like living next to this person. When we think about porous boundaries are when we learn when we are taught through past painful experiences with other people that we have been connected to, that we shouldn't have fences. No one should have fences. I shouldn't have a fence and you shouldn't have a fence. Now, sometimes the pulling down of the fence is only one-sided. And I'll give you an example of this. So sometimes people have porous boundaries outward and healthy boundaries inward. Meaning, I'm going to go onto other people's plots of land when it doesn't necessarily feel good for them, but I think it's the right thing for me to do. I'm going to give people advice when they haven't asked for it. I'm going to help people out when I haven't asked how they want to be helped. I'm going to gift people things when I haven't ensured that they want it. I'm going to emotionally dump on them when I haven't gotten consent or like made sure that they have the space. And I also maintain my own fence. So I ensure that people have to ask before they do any of that stuff to me. Anyone ever been in a relationship like that? Where they come on your land whenever they want and you have to ask to come on theirs? Anyone? Yeah, right? Like if you're listening to this and going, oh goodness, either I am that person or someone else is that person towards me. Cool. You're not alone. You're not wrong. You're normal. This is all normal. So porous boundaries outward are where we go onto other people's plots of land without consent. Porous boundaries inward are where we where we let other people ignore our fences. Where people just like barge through, or they're like, hey, I'm going to tear down your fence. Is that cool? Hey, I'm going to come dump trash on your land. Is that cool? Hey, I'm going to throw a party that keeps you up until 2 a.m. Is that cool? Hey, I'm going to let my dog poop in your yard. Is that cool? Great. Awesome. Done. And a lot of times they don't even ask. They just do it. That cool is like as they're already doing it. And you don't feel safe saying, hey, I don't like that. You've been taught that it's acceptable for other people to come onto your plot of land and dump trash, for other people to keep you up until 2 a.m. throwing a party next door, for other people to let their dog poop in your yard. You've been taught that you're not allowed to have a fence that people honor. When we have porous boundaries inward and outward with someone else, this is codependency. Codependency and enmeshment is where it's like, we have no fences. There's no fence. My plot of land is your plot of land. We complete each other. There's no boundaries. We're always connected. There's a lack of autonomy, and we're fine with that. We love not having separate identities. And when you really get down to it, on the surface, it looks like they love not having separate identities until we start taking responsibility for each other's emotions, or we start taking responsibility for each other's actions, or we start taking responsibility for managing this other person's plot of land, and they're responsible for ours, forgetting that it's both of our own jobs to manage our own fences and our own plots of land. So this is enmeshment. This is codependency, where we go, I'm going to manage your plot of land and you're going to manage mine, and we're going to tear the fences down. And honestly, a lot of our societal conditioning, especially in the Western world, especially in traditional marriage, you complete me. Think about love and what you've learned about romantic relationships since you were a kiddo. We complete each other. 2 halves become whole. 2 souls become one. You're my other half, my better half. Anyone ever heard that? You're my better half. My body belongs to you. Your body belongs to me. I'm going to be straight with anyone who's listening to this. My husband and I were in a very codependent relationship up until probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we've still, like this year, done a lot of disentangling around codependency and enmeshment. Growing up in and getting married in church, which is, I'm not knocking. And we had to really look at where is the autonomy in our relationship? Because if everything I'm doing is for you and everything you're doing is for me, we've got a problem. Also, sometimes we'll see a different dynamic. And so we get to talk about rigid boundaries now. So if porous boundaries are, there's no fences, we share our plots of land, and I'm going to manage yours and you're going to manage mine. I'm going to come over onto your land without consent. You're allowed to come over onto my land, even when it doesn't feel good. Rigid boundaries, if porous boundaries are no fences, rigid boundaries are electric fences. They are moats with drawbridges with alligators swimming in them. Good luck coming onto my land. If we go back to the guarding dog example, right? Good luck coming onto my land. You can't. I have made my plot of land inaccessible to you. Or that's a rigid boundary inward. You can't come onto my land. A rigid boundary outward is I refuse to come onto your land. I refuse to connect with you. When you need help, like if your house is on fire and I see your house on fire, I'm not coming over there to help you. Handle it yourself. I'm worried about my needs, not yours. So rigid boundaries protect us and they protect more autonomy. Porous boundaries are swing more towards the connection side. Rigid boundaries swing more towards the autonomy side. I'm looking out for me. You can't help me. I won't help you. So sometimes we see relationships where somebody has porous boundaries outward and their partner has rigid boundaries outward. So this partner that has the porous boundaries outward is desperately trying to connect. And the partner who has rigid boundaries has rigid boundaries inward is what I meant to say. The partner who has rigid boundaries inward is like, nope, you cannot connect with me. That does not feel safe. And so this person's like, please connect with me. Please connect with me. Please connect with me. This person with no fences. I'm going to tear all my fences down for you. Please come onto my land. Please let me come onto yours. And this person with rigid boundaries is like, absolutely not. What is fascinating is I see a lot of relationships like this. A lot of relationships like this, where you'll have partners who have the exact opposites. You'll have a partner who has porous boundaries outward and rigid boundaries inward, and a partner who has porous boundaries inward and rigid boundaries outward. And it gets very, very re-traumatizing. Because remember, we learned how to have either no fence or an electric fence. We learned to have a guard dog that attacks versus a guard dog that rolls over based off of our childhood and young adult experiences. Oftentimes, our nervous systems will go find what's familiar. And we don't realize it, but we go look for relationships that model the boundaries that we had modeled for us when we were younger. And so we end up oftentimes with a intimate or romantic partner or a best friend that looks an awful lot like one of our primary caregivers in terms of their boundaries. I'm just like letting that sink in. I want you to hear that again. We learn how to set our boundaries. We learn how to decide when we are autonomous and when we connect from the original boundaries that are set for us in childhood and young adulthood. And so when we go then form close connections with other humans as we get into adulthood, we use those as modeling to pick other humans. Not consciously, subconsciously, we use those as modeling to pick other humans that we want to be close to. Listening to all of this sometimes can be like, womp womp. You're like, okay, Lee, you just told me about, yep, I see how I let other people dump trash on my plot of land. Or I see how I continually let people move in right next to me, right to the plots of land right next to me. I put people really close to me that don't know how to hold healthy boundaries and look a lot like previous relationships that I've had in the past. So what the heck do I do about this? And this is where you get to start examining your own trauma responses, your guard dog. How does your guard dog show up towards other humans? In which situations? Or you can use the fence analogy. Where do you put up electric fences and where do you tear down your fence? So I might put up electric fences towards people who are disrespectful. I might withdraw connection from people who are disrespectful. And I might tear fences down for people who are like, oh my gosh, let me save you. You look like you're in pain. It looks like your house is on fire. Do you need help saving? I'll come save you. By the way, these are personal examples. I get very, very rigid in my boundaries towards people who treat me disrespectfully. And I get very, very, very porous in my boundaries when I feel like things aren't going well or where I feel like I'm about to disappoint someone or I feel like somebody doesn't like me. And so I will I will oftentimes, and I have improved upon this so much, and giving myself the space and grace to say that like I'm not perfect at this. I learned to use damsel in distress, which is porous boundaries inward. Please come save me. Please fix me. Please help make all my problems go away. Please come be my knight in shining armor, which is Fawn, by the way. That's my guard dog rolling over and showing his belly. Please come help me. Come save me. My paw's stuck. I hurt my paw. Can you come help? So we start examining when I am in connection with somebody. When do I pull away? When do I erect the fence? When I am alone, when do I tear down the fence? Or when I'm in connection with other people, where do I tear down the fence? Where do I withdraw and where do I step over the line? And why? What is happening just before I'm tearing the fence down or I'm building it up? What is happening to trigger me to do that? Another question to ask in like in a slightly different manner to get to this is like, where did I learn this? What was modeled for me? And we're not making the humans that we learned this from wrong because they had it modeled for them and the people that modeled it for them had it modeled for them and so on and so forth. There's a reason why generational trauma exists, and it's because we learn how to be in autonomy and or in connection with other humans from the people that raise us and how they model it with us. And so we pass these things along. And so a lot of people get really uncomfortable looking at this because they say, well, my parents did their best, or I loved my parents and I feel like I had a really good childhood. And I am not, I want to say this so clearly, I am not discounting that. You can have parents who absolutely love you, caregivers who did their absolute best and still had wonky boundaries with you, still would violate your personal space, would have porous outward boundaries and come onto your plot of land when you didn't ask them to. This is something that we've had to actually negotiate with one of our kiddos. One of our kiddos is big on privacy. They don't like to talk a lot about their private life. They don't like to connect about specific things. And as parents, we want to honor that. And we also need to ensure their safety. And so there's certain things that they don't want to talk about that we're like, okay, cool. How do we have this conversation in a way that values your autonomy and that also helps us keep you safe? And we've had that conversation with them of, we want to honor your privacy. And here's how we can do that the easiest through our connection with each other. And we don't always get it right because my husband and I are coming into that situation with our own experiences, our own past painful experiences. And so is our kiddo. It's really about how do we make this as mutually beneficial as possible? How do you like it for me to come on your land? Do you like me to knock? Do you like me to call your phone first? Do you like me to holler over the fence? How does it feel best for me to try to connect with you? How does it feel best for you to connect with me? Because we might actually need different things. You might like it if I call first before I come over. I might not mind it if you just waltz right through the gate and come through the front door. We can both be right in that, and we can both honor what each other wants. The other thing is that from an evaluation standpoint, you get to look at whose plots of land you've put closest to you. It's a lot harder for somebody to dump trash on your front lawn if you have moved 200 miles away from them versus if they live right next door. So sometimes we need to move. We need to create physical and or emotional distance between people, other people, and ourselves so that we can hold healthier boundaries. Because sometimes other people don't understand. Sometimes other people don't see the problem with dumping trash on your lawn. Sometimes people don't understand the problem with setting fires in their own house all the time and asking you to continually come over and put it out. Some people don't have the self-awareness to understand that you are allowed to not like that. And so we are allowed to create physical and or emotional distance if necessary. And from the analogy perspective, we're allowed to move our plot of land further away. So what boundaries look like when we are in conversation with somebody else is not, you can't do that. I don't like that. Those aren't boundaries. A lot of people think that when they set boundaries, the way that they're going to do it is say, okay, I'm going to get really clear on what feels good for me. And then I'm going to tell this other person what they can and can't do. No, because that puts the control in this other person's hand and you don't have control over them. You can't control them. Boundaries, the setting of boundaries requires us to do what's within our control. And so the setting of boundaries looks like, here's how it feels good for me to connect with you. If you aren't able to honor that, I am going to change my side of the connection. It really doesn't feel good for me when you don't call and you just pop over. If you decide to keep popping over without calling and actually coming in my house without calling, we're going to change the locks and you're not going to have a key. We're going to change the garage code. You're not going to have a key. I actually had this happen with a family member. It was actually kind of a funny story because my husband grew up with having people just pop in all the time. And it didn't really bother me as much to have people just pop in all the time. But for him, a boundary was, I really would like to know that people are coming over before they come over, at least a 5-minute heads up. So I can make sure I'm dressed. So I can make sure like the dog's outside so he doesn't like jump on anybody. So I can like mentally prepare myself. Or if I can say like, hey, I'm sleeping. Hey, I'm doing something else. Hey, I'm in the bathroom. Like, give me a minute. And so when we had this happen, we ended up having communication with this other person. And we said, hey, here's the deal. You can come over without announcing yourself. And our kids are now gone from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. I work at home. Hubby works at home. If you come over and you just come in, you might see something you don't want to see. And that worked. That was a great way of setting a boundary. Like, hey, we don't care if you see it. You might care if you see it. And since then, we've had a really, really great connection and a lot of really great communication before we pop over. We have an agreement now that we text or call and say, hey, I'm coming over in 5 minutes. Is that cool? And if not, okay, great. Thanks. It works really well. The boundary might be, hey, every time we talk about this topic, every time you bring up this topic, it really feels harmful for me. So if you bring up this topic again, I'm going to end the conversation. I'm going to walk away because I don't want to talk about this. And if you are somebody who has been taught to not have fences, if you are somebody who's been trained to be more codependent, if that's how you learned how to set or to not set boundaries, this is going to be hard for you. And for some of you, the opposite might be it. You might have some really rigid boundaries. And so letting people in and letting people connect with you more might feel hard. And I want to normalize the hardness of that. I want to normalize the discomfort and also remind you that just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not beneficial. Sometimes new feels weird and uncomfortable. Sometimes new and good feel weird and uncomfortable. Having conversations around, hey, this is my need. I need this space. I need this type of communication. I need this boundary. And if you can't honor that, this is what I'm going to do in response. I hope this was helpful for all of you. If you have any follow-up conversation, questions, pieces around this, don't hesitate to email us at hello@institutefortrauma.com. Happy to answer those if you're listening on the podcast. For my people here on the live, feel free to drop a hashtag replay and or drop your questions in the comments and I will come back and answer them. If you're listening on the podcast, just a reminder that a lot of these episodes that we record, about half of the episodes we record are live in our Becoming Trauma Informed Facebook group. So you can search for us online, Becoming Trauma Informed, Creating Safer Spaces. We'd love to have you there. And I'm going to go ahead and just plug our upcoming Trauma Informed Psychologically Safe Certificate program that launches once a year in January. We are gearing up for our big launch for that in November. And so if this conversation has intrigued you, we talk about boundaries as one of our 32 modules in the Trauma-Informed Psychologically Safe certification. We also talk about boundaries in our upcoming Trauma-Informed Coach program. If you're a coach listening to this, we're going to be talking about those there and how you create healthy boundaries with your clients and with yourself and with anyone that you are in connection with from a business perspective. If any of that sounds good for you, send us an email. You can ask us for more details on the coach program or the certificate program, and we will get with you in that, or you can leave it in the comments if you're watching in the Facebook group. Love you all. Hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Invitation to head to our show notes to check out the offers and connections we mentioned, or you can just head straight over to institutefortrauma.com and hop in our email list so that you never miss any of the cool things that we're doing over at the Institute. Invitation to be well and to take care of yourself this week, and we'll see you next time.